Huh?
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
I don't know. Welcome to the October 23rd portion of the October meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. We have, I think, about 6 items on our agenda tonight. But first, we have some business items to take care of. And first, under general business, I'd like to recognize Scott McCullough, our planning director. This is his very last meeting with us after 12 years, and depending on where you look, it's either 12 years and 4 months or 12 years and 5 months.
I haven't checked.
Well, according to Scott's LinkedIn website, he's started 1 month earlier than the city likes to say he started.
I just round up to 13 years.
But Scott's first meeting was actually August 7th, 2007, when he was introduced to the City Commission by then City Manager Dave Corliss. Then Mayor Sue Hack said that we were fortunate to have someone of McCullough's caliber on board, and I think that's the general consensus still. And Scott found out just what he was getting into that first night, because the big item on that agenda was the reconsideration of rezoning of 6th and Wakarusa for the second Walmart in town. And those of you that remember, that was a highly controversial topic. It ended up in protests in this room and play acting and protests and drums outside. It was a big deal. So that was Scott's welcome to our city, and I don't think it's stopped since then. We've
First
kind of
midnight meeting. First midnight meeting.
I took advantage of a fellow list maker, Jeff Crick, and we came up with some numbers for Scott. Scott's been here now on his 3rd city manager, his 12th mayor. He's been through 6 city commission elections, and he's been through 2 county administrators. He's been involved in consolidating and moving the planning department to its current location, and other big ticket and possibly controversial items. I swear, it doesn't matter. In Scott's position, everybody in Lawrence has despised him at some point because of what the issues have been. We've been through confined animal feeding operations, the rental licensing program, Cluck, which I was a proud member of Cluck, which was an organization pushing for the ability to have chickens in town, which then grew into the urban ag ordinance, which Scott also ushered through. Bauer Farms in all its incarnations to what it is today. The HERE project, which I got to, that's when I first saw Scott really react to a change in attitude in here. That project started with 1 set of commissioners with 1 set of directions, and by the time it reached its final conclusion, we had a new city manager and an entirely new commission almost that was changing direction. So Scott was caught in the crosshairs and handled that with such aplomb and skill. It was very instructive. We counted up, 42 amendments to Horizon 2020 that actually passed, not counting the ones that didn't pass. 8 sector plans that were done under his guidance. 89 text amendments to the development code that actually passed. And I don't know. We had, big things, farmland converted into Venture Park, our new business park. The development of the foundation of the affordable housing, AHAB. What's the second A? Yeah. The housing board that's had 1 item that's going through and almost passed so far. And he's really reshaped the format of our planning commission orientation, taking it from a 2-day ordeal to a 1-day, highly concentrated and highly effective and informative meeting each year, which we have coming up, but Scott won't be there this time. And on top of that, also he initiated and helped work on the current Plan 2040, which the final portion of will probably come back to this commission for the last vote next month. And he won't be here for that, but it was his baby. They did that all in-house, which is different for Lawrence on many things. I guess we got the smart code came in while Scott was here. So his imprint was going to last on the city for quite a while. And I'm sure, and I know I've learned a lot from him over the time. No matter what you ask at one of these meetings or the city commission meetings, if they ask questions, he'll have an answer 99% of the time. It's rare that they'll have to get back to you with it, because he and his team that's with him can put their fingers on just about anything very quickly. So on behalf of all of us on the Planning Commission, I want to thank you very much for your service to the community and wish you well in your new job in Lenexa, because Scott's probably going to get to spend more evenings with his family. Scott did say that at our mid-month meeting that his rough estimate is he'd spent over 600 evenings at meetings over his tenure. Jeff and I figured it's probably closer to 800 when you add in all the other public information meetings and things that weren't official meetings in this room. But it's almost 600 meetings just in this room in the evening. And that's not the daytime meetings. Because twice a month, Scott's at a city commission meeting until sometimes midnight or 1 a.m., and then at one of our meetings by 7:30 the next morning. So it is, it's going to be a hard act to follow. So just as Mayor Hack said all those years ago, we've been very fortunate to have someone of Scott's caliber on board and to set us on the right direction. And I believe Commissioner Sands went ahead and has a plaque that he'd like to present to Scott right now.
So, just so that you remember, we gave Sheila one of these when she retired, and thought it was appropriate. This is my I don't know. I've slowed down on my mention of the golden criteria lately. I need to step it back up. I lost my laminated copy. I think Julie took it and threw it away. But the golden criteria, which quite frankly, in Kansas, we're quite fortunate that the Supreme Court years ago gave us some things to consider when it comes to a rezoning. And it makes, I have a friend who does urban planning in Missouri, and each municipality does it differently, and they have 13 criteria for rezoning. I mean, we only have 10. That's not too bad. So, Scott, on behalf of commissioners, past and present, thank you for your service to our city, and we know you wouldn't do it if you didn't love it, and so we're going to miss your passion and your care for our city.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commission. And I just have a brief word to say, and you mentioned it, it's the team. I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by this amazing team of highly trained, highly professional staff, highly trained and impassioned commissioners on all the boards that we staff. And it's such a joy to come to work and be part of that team that really supports me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, there is a reception for Scott this Friday from 3 to 5 over in the planning office. It's being done by the planning
Next
department.
Friday, actually.
A week from Friday?
A week from Friday.
A week from Friday. It's November 1st.
More chocolates.
November 1st. Okay. All right. Well, that brings us to our agenda. we have any new written communications from the public? See, he's already gone.
No, sir. I'm looking for the lamination. I'm sure it's there somewhere.
Any new written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
No, sir.
Any written action of any waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
No, sir.
Any ex parte communications by any of the commissioners? Good, none. Any declaration of abstentions from any of the items on the agenda this evening? Okay. This time we open the floor to general public comment, just as at the city commission. This is a time for any member of the public to come to the podium and talk about anything you want related to planning, as long as it's not on this evening's agenda, and you can have 3 minutes to do that. Are there any members of the public that want to make any general comment? Please sign in your name and let us know, sign your name and state your name clearly so we can hear it up here.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Mark Doljack, D-O-L-J-A-C, and I live, and I'm homeowner and resident, property owner at 1196 East 1067 Road in the Southgate subdivision. My property is located on the southeast corner of East 1067 Road and North 1200 Road, otherwise known as Douglas County Road 458.
That's going to be an item on our agenda this evening.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm a greenhorn here. This is my first time participating.
Okay, that's fine. It's always odd when you come in, but we're going to have those agenda items. That's item number 2 and 3 on our
I'm
agenda
sorry.
tonight. So
I'll
if you
stand down for
come
the
up
time
and
being.
start again at
I
that time.
apologize.
Agenda items. We had a request by staff before coming in, and unless there's any objection, when we get to items 2 and 3, those will be one combined presentation by Becky Pepper, and we will extend the public comment time because we're combining the two from 3 minutes to 4.5 minutes. So that brings us to item number 1. Consider approving a final development plan for Miracon Plaza, located at 2210 Wakarusa Drive.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. You have seen this item in one permutation or another over this past year. This is the final development plan for Phase 1 of the Miracon Plaza planned commercial development. The property is generally located on the northeast corner of Wakarusa and Clinton Parkway. This was originally zoned under the old code. You looked at a land use change that essentially added the residential component to it earlier this year and approved the preliminary development plan in January that went on to the City Commission in July of this year, and then to the Planning Commission in August. This is under old code, so procedurally, the preliminary development plan is recommended by this body and forwarded to the governing body. A final development plan under the old code comes to this body for final approval. It is part of a commercial node at that intersection of Wakarusa and Clinton Parkway, and this application represents Phase 1 of what was shown in the preliminary development plan for this entire corner. This slide just provides some context of what the surrounding land uses are. Residential uses are generally located to the north and to the east, as well as south of Clinton Parkway, and then commercial and non-residential uses are located along the west side of Wakarusa Drive. This slide highlights the preliminary development plan that was approved, showing the 3 phases of the project. It is phase 1 that is being considered tonight. It will have a shared access that will provide access to the entire development from Wakarusa. And then this is phase 1 at the northern end of the project. The proposed final development plan is consistent with the approved preliminary. This is a mixed-use building that includes space for commercial as well as office and a number of residential units. Off-street parking is provided for the project in excess of what is required for that specific phase, something we made note of in the preliminary development plan because parking is shared throughout this project. The building elevations are provided. They're still very consistent with what we were originally looking at on the preliminary development plan. The 2 elevations that are shown on the slide show the front-facing elevation that will look out at Wakarusa Drive and the rear elevation that will be looking out over the open space on the back side of the project. Residential uses would be accessed from this backside. Staff's recommendation is for approval. There were a couple of conditions that staff noted, and these related to the infrastructure requirements for the project. We did note them in the final development plan as conditions. The applicant is aware of those conditions and is working with staff to address them. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and the applicant is here to make their presentation this evening as well.
Thank you, Sandy. This time we'd open this matter for public comment. Any members of the public that wish to comment on this item, please come to the podium, sign in your name, and state your name clearly for us, and you can have up to 3 minutes to give your comments. Oh, I forgot the applicant. Sorry. Is the applicant here? Of course.
Hi, Commissioners. Tim Herndon, Herndon Planning and Design, representing Off-Piste Incorporated. The property owner, Tim Schmidt, is with me here tonight. With regard to a presentation, I would just like to say that the rezoning application came before you in March of this year. You recommended it unanimously for approval to the City Commission. It was approved unanimously. The preliminary development plan came to you in July. You recommended it unanimously, forwarded it to the City Commission, which approved it unanimously in August. And this comes to you with staff recommendation for approval. With that, I'll stand by for any questions or comments you might have, and I thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Now we'll open it to public comment. Any members of the public wish to comment on this item? All right, not seeing any, I'll bring it back up to the commission. Any discussion, questions? Or have we asked all our questions the last couple of times I've been here? Any motions? Commissioner Willie,
Can we ask about the stormwater
you can
conditions?
ask whatever you
Could you
want.
just talk to us a little bit about the reason behind the stormwater conditions?
What we needed to make clear with the project was that the stormwater pieces had to be in place up front. The applicant has submitted public improvement plans that are technical documents that go to our stormwater engineer and city engineer. These were specific comments that came from them. I'm not sure if I can answer in any great detail about what those are, because those are those engineering standards that were tied back to the project.
Are you saying that the drainage, stormwater management has to be in place for all phases of the project
Yes,
at
that
phase
has to go in
one?
first.
Okay.
With
Mr.
phase
Herndon,
one.
did you have anything else you wanted to add about that? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Motions? Commissioner Sinclair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recommend that we approve, or I move that we approve Final Development Plan FDP 19-00410, the Miracon Development Plan, based on the findings of fact presented in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions specified therein.
We have a second? seconded by Commissioner Struckhoff. Any additional comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 9-0.
Thank you.
Item 2, consider approving a conditional use permit for a boat storage use located at 1072 North 1200 Road. And item 3, consider approving a conditional use permit for a vacation rental, a rooming, boarding, and lodging house use located on approximately 6.3 acres at 1072 North 1200 Road.
Thank you and good evening, Commissioners. My name is Becky Pepper with the Planning Department. The subject property is identified on this slide and in other slides in this presentation by the red star. The property is located within the unincorporated portion of the county, and it's also within the urban growth area. The boundaries of the UGA are identified on this slide by that red line. More specifically, the subject property is located south of Highway 40, to the west of Highway 59, and to the east of Clinton Lake. The subject property is approximately 6 acres and is located on the north side of North 1200 Road, which is also County Road Route 458. The property is developed with a single-family residence and an accessory structure, and the remainder of the property contains woodlands. The proposed conditional use permit is for the development of an open storage area that would contain a maximum of 10 boats or RVs. Changes to the property that are proposed with this conditional use permit include the addition of a 75-foot by 125-foot storage area. The boats and RVs would be parked to the north of that area, and then the remainder of that space would be used to access those parking spaces. The storage area would be located behind the residence and behind the accessory structure. The property takes access from North 1200 Road, and there are no proposed or required changes to this current access, with the exception that this existing gravel drive would be widened to 20 feet and extended to the boat storage area. So the conditional use permit application was reviewed with the golden factors, which I'm going to provide a brief overview of some of those factors for you now. The subject property is zoned agricultural, and there is a small portion of valley channel located on the northwest corner of the property. The zoning in the area is predominantly agricultural. There is suburban home residential zoning to the south and valley channel zoning to the north of the property. And there's also property located to the northwest that is located within the city limits, and it is zoned open space. There's a mix of land uses in the area, with agricultural and rural residential being the predominant uses. The area to the south is a rural subdivision that was platted in 1989. There are also recreational land uses in the area that include Clinton Lake and associated city parks to the west, and then Westwick Rugby Complex is located to the east. And then there are also natural features in the area that include stream corridor and woodlands. And this slide here provides you a more detailed perspective of the land uses immediately surrounding the subject property. The area to the south of the property, as I mentioned, contains a rural platted subdivision. Then on the north side of North 1200 Road, the subject property is primarily surrounded by woodlands, a stream corridor, and some agricultural uses. And then there is a rural residence that's located at the southwest corner of the subject property. Now this slide shows another perspective of the land uses that will help illustrate the character of the area. This map shows the land uses that are classified by the Douglas County Appraiser's Office. On this map, the green color represents the open space and parks in Clinton Lake. The yellow color represents the rural residences. The purple color represents the agricultural uses, and the blue colors represent institutional uses. This blue here is the rugby complex. And there's a network of higher classification roadways within the area. The subject property takes access from North 1200 Road, which is County Route 458, and is classified as a principal arterial. The roadway connects with other higher classification roadways to the east and west that include Highway 59 and a principal arterial and minor arterial roadways. The county zoning regulations provide standards to some of the uses permitted in the, with approval of a conditional use permit. The purpose of these standards is to help mitigate impacts and improve compatibility with the surrounding area. For the boat storage use, the associated standard states that open storage must meet the minimum yard requirements. The property is zoned agricultural and it is adjacent to a principal arterial. Given those two items, the front yard requirement for the property is to be set back 210 feet from the roadway center line. The other yard requirements are that to have a side setback of 10 feet and a rear setback of 30 feet. And as shown, is illustrated on this plan here, the proposed boat storage area would be set back 278 feet from the roadway center line in the front. And then the closest it is to the east property line, and it's set back 125 feet from that property line. The boat storage standard provided in the county zoning regulations also address screening requirements and states that open storage must be screened by view from a view-reducing wall, a fence, landscaping material, and screened from adjacent public roadways and residentially zoned property. The proposed location of the boat and RV storage would be located behind the existing residence and behind the accessory structure. The rear portion of the property contains a stand of mature trees, and a portion of those trees would be removed to accommodate the storage area, but the majority of the trees would remain, and they would provide that screening to the properties to the west, north, and east. The property also contains trees in the front yard and adjacent to the roadway, and the landscaping along this location, this landscaping along with the location of being located behind the existing structures would help screen the proposed storage area from view from the street right-of-way. So what we're seeing here is a picture taken from the road looking west. And here we're looking from the road directly onto the property. And on this view, we're looking back towards the east. So in addition to the specific use standards provided in the zoning regulations, there are other potential impacts that could be associated with the boat storage use that can be reviewed to ensure that that use is compatible with the surrounding area. So for example, a boat storage facility could have exterior lighting that could impact adjacent properties, but there's no lighting proposed with this proposed conditional use permit. And staff does recommend that a condition is put on the CUP that notes that any future lighting would require approval, administrative approval of a lighting plan. Another potential impact for the boat storage use could be an increase of traffic. However, this request facilitates the storage of a maximum number of 10 boats or RVs. And the city engineer, when he reviewed the application, provided feedback that the traffic impacts would be minimal. And then finally, inadequate property maintenance could be another potential impact with the boat storage use. Examples of this could be if an area were allowed to become overgrown, or if items other than boats or RVs are allowed to be stored in the area. And so for this, staff has recommended that a condition be applied to the conditional use permit that would prohibit the storage of anything other in the identified boat storage area with anything other than boats or RVs. And also, it should be noted that a conditional use permit is an enforceable tool, and that tool can be used to address the continued maintenance of the storage area. So staff recommends that the conditional use permit be administratively reviewed every 5 years to allow for the assessment of any issues or changes. Staff's full evaluation of the findings of fact are provided in the staff report. It was found that through this evaluation that the request complies with the remaining factors. Staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit for the boat storage use and forwarding it to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions, which include that the open storage only contain boats or RVs, that the boat and storage area be limited to the area shown on the site plan and limited to a maximum number of 10 boats or RVs, and that any expansion in size or number would require approval of a new conditional use permit, that any future lighting would require approval of a lighting plan, and that the CUP be administratively reviewed every 5 years. Because the second CUP request is for the same property, I'm going to continue on with my presentation, but we're now going to move from that boat storage conditional use permit to the second conditional use storage request, which is for a rooming, boarding, and lodging house request. One thing I wanted to note and make clear, though, is that while I'm presenting them together, they are two separate items. They will have two separate recommendations, and those recommendations are independent of one another. So the second conditional use permit request is for the use of the existing residential structure as a vacation rental, or what is commonly referred to as an Airbnb. The county zoning regulations classify this use as a rooming, boarding, and lodging use, which requires approval of a conditional use permit in the A district. The property owner has indicated that it'll be the basement that'll be offered for rental, and that basement contains 2 bedrooms. They've also indicated that they intend to maintain occupancy of the structure. Like before, this conditional use permit was evaluated for golden factors, but because this is the same property, I'm not going to go into the zoning and land use and character of the area again. It will be still applicable as what you just discussed. One area where the 2 conditional use permits may differ is in their review of the detrimental effects to nearby properties. Unlike the boat storage use, the county zoning regulations don't offer specific standards for the rooming, boarding, and lodging use. However, when considering the appropriateness of the use, there are some other impacts that can be considered. The first of those would be operating days and times for the rental. And as I mentioned, the property owner has indicated that they'll continue to occupy the single-family residence. They've also indicated that they will provide the days that the rental will be available will be Fridays and Saturdays, and that they'll have rental rules that'll stipulate that quiet hours will begin at 10 p.m. and that no parties will be permitted. Second consideration is outdoor activity. And a condition of approval that staff recommends is that the rental be limited to the residence. So it would apply only to the house, and in doing so, it would prohibit additional rentals being offered on the property on temporary structures like tents and campers. And then the third consideration is parking. And county zoning regulations requires 1 parking space for the single-family residence and 1 parking space per bedroom for the rooming, boarding, and lodging house use. So that would be a total of 3 parking spaces that would be required by code. The property contains a 2-car garage, and then parking spaces outside of the garage for 2 additional spaces. So they have 4 when they need 3, but there's also an opportunity here for parking if needed in that turnaround area. Based on the findings of fact in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit for the rooming, boarding, and lodging house use, and forwarding it to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, which include that the use shall apply only to the interior of the structure, and that it not apply to other areas of the property, including campers, tents, or other structures not inhabitable by code, and that the CUP is valid for 10 years, and the approval will be null and void after 10 years unless the Board of County Commissioners hasn't approved an extension. So with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Becky.
And the applicant is here.
Okay, I'm sure there are going to be questions.
Okay.
Would the applicant like to speak?
I don't know if I would like to speak, but I will.
Yep,
My name is
alright.
Connie Robertson. I live at 1072 North 1200 Road. Let me write my name here. And I had a lot of notes and things that I wanted to go over, but Becky pretty much told you everything I was going to say anyway, so I guess I'm open to questions if you have any. One thing that she didn't touch on, and her and I never even talked about, I don't want to provide a lot of lighting out there because as far as I'm concerned, if somebody's going to bring a boat or an RV in, I think it should be during daylight hours only, and so I don't feel like I have to accommodate them with any kind of lighting. However, I do plan, if this all gets passed, to put security cameras in the area, so we would have that. So that was one thing that she had talked about. And also, for lack of a better word, we've called everything an RV. I have no intention of having any buses out there. When I say a boat or RV storage, I'm talking a little speedboat you might take to Clinton Lake, or a pool-type camper, or something like that, or maybe a small RV, but none of the big ones. I don't want those out there. So that's just a couple of clarifications that I had. So do you have any questions for me?
Well, in a matter of efficiency, any questions for the applicant at this time? All right, seeing none, there probably will be.
I've got more information. Thank you.
Before we go to public comment, I wonder if staff, perhaps Scott, could go, we had up here on the screen that a CUP is an enforceable tool. Could you briefly highlight the enforcement process and what might trigger a review of a CUP prior to the time frame that is requested?
So the required, or the recommended review time is that 5 years. However, before the 5-year period, if there were, say, a compliance issue, if there were, the county staff was notified of some issue that the use was not being used as approved. So, for example, there were more than 10 boats, it wasn't appropriately screened. With the vacation rental, if there were noise complaints or campers being used for rentals, things like that, it could be reconsidered by the county commission, and the conditional use permits could be revoked. Is that what you had in mind, Commissioner?
Yeah, so the process is basically, there would be a complaint to the county code enforcement, and if it rises to the level that they believe it justifies possible revocation of the CUP, it actually goes to a hearing before the county commission. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this time, we'll open the floor to public comment. Because we combined the two items, we'll extend the time period from the normal 3 to 4.5 minutes, so you can comment on both items. If you do want to comment, please come up, sign in, and clearly state your name. So who would like to start? We already have your name signed.
I appreciate your indulgence on my ignorance on the procedure.
That's fine.
Again, Mark Doljak at 1196 East 1067 Road. I live in the Southgate subdivision, immediately to the south of the subject property. I purchased my home in 1996 knowing that the nearby area was zoned for residential and agricultural use, partially surrounded by floodplains, and I've worked for over 30 years to acquire and maintain this residence in what I consider to be a peaceful residential setting. I'm here this evening to express my opposition to these two permits. As a rural homeowner, I am opposed to my quiet residential area becoming a commercial development, essentially. I believe that these CUPs will establish a precedent for added commercialization to follow, and I'm concerned about the detrimental impacts of the proposed uses on the peacefulness of my surroundings, the aesthetics of my property, the quality of my life, my use and enjoyment of my property value, and the safety along County Road 458 on the north edge of my property, and the volume of litter that comes with all of that. I'm one of two professionals that live in the home. We both depend on restful sleep to earn a living, so peace is important to us. One of my chief concerns, however, is it regards safety of this plan. I'm very concerned about the traffic hazards that operating a boat and RV storage facility will present to those who travel on County Road 458. The posted speed limit on County Road 458, from which the subject Robertson property is provided access, is 55 miles an hour. And that's a limit that's routinely exceeded by motorists, as I can attest just from times that I've gone to turn onto my residential street. I've been tailgated, and I've had a number of people put me in positions where I felt like I was in a close call trying to negotiate that turn. Pages 8 and 12 of the agenda item report for the conditional use permit 19-413 provides aerial photographs of Ms. Robertson's property. And as I understand, there's plans for a 20-foot wide driveway for that conditional use of boat and RV storage. The county engineer indicated that given the low number of boats and RVs that would be stored on the site, minimal traffic would be generated. I don't dispute that finding or that recommendation or observation concerning the generation of additional traffic volume, but I believe that the county engineer unfortunately has failed to consider the disruption to traffic that the proposed uses will impose on County Road 458 with merely a 20-foot wide driveway, and the resulting hazards it will present to public safety. I would ask the Commission to consider the risks of allowing anyone to operate a boat or RV storage facility, a business operation that requires larger vehicles, typically pulling trailers, and many of which have lengthy wheelbases, to enter the property via a 20-foot wide gravel driveway intersecting a 2-lane highway with legal speeds of 55 miles an hour. Exacerbating the risk of this configuration, the intersection is situated at the top of a small hill where sight distances for eastbound drivers approach the intersection with Ms. Robertson's property or driveway are very limited, and the driveway has only a limited apron surrounded by stormwater drainage ditches on either side. The driveway entry is insufficient to safely enable any vehicle with a trailer to negotiate the turnoff of County Road 458 either direction with prevailing traffic moving at highway speeds. Given the proposed uses of the property and the type and capacity of storage proposed, I urge the Commission to consider the increased usage of the driveway as well, particularly on weekends when vacationers, boats, and RVs are more likely to enter and exit the driveway.
Thank you, Mr. Goljak. That's
I
a little
do
bit
have,
over.
I appreciate the opportunity. I do have written comments that I would be happy to, or that I intend to present actually. Who do I present
You can
those
give them,
to?
anyone over here, they won't get to us this evening, but when this item goes to the county commission, they'll be made part of the packet for that hearing.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Can you bring up the satellite map of the property? Thank you very much. Shows the trees. Satellite. Nice. Hi, Roger Hill. I live at 1191 East 1067 Road, just adjacent to the North 1200 Road where the property proposed boat storage is located. Like the other speaker, we moved out of town to get to a nice, quiet neighborhood, and we don't want to see industrialized. Afraid this will set a precedence, and we'll get the boat yard, then we'll get a boat repair shop, then an auto repair shop, and then an auto impound yard, and then a junkyard. And we really just want to keep this residential. The other thing is, this area is totally unsuited for boat storage. I don't think that Connie understands what she's getting into. She's going to do this in the trees, you know, and people are going to pull the trailers in there. She's not going to have lights. They're going to run into the other trailers, and then they're going to basically file an insurance claim against her. And after a few claims, they'll cancel her insurance. She won't have insurance anymore. The other thing is, you know, being in the trees there, if there's a fire, right? These boats have gasoline in them and foam and all that. If there's a fire, the fires, you know, at a boat storage like Clinton Lake, the boats are separated, they're in an open field, you can, you know, get all the way around. Here, if there's a fire, it'll go up into the trees, and then it'll catch the trees on fire, then the limbs will start falling into the other boats, and there's foam in the boats and gasoline, and we're gonna get a, you know, big inferno of gasoline, fuel, timber. And you can see the tree line, the fire's in there, it can spread to those other houses. The fire department tries to get in there to fight it. They can't get behind the property because if you look at the tree line there, there's no road back there. So you could end up with a big inferno. You know, we had a lot of wind these last couple of days. You can imagine if that wind was blowing when the fire, you know, came out. So I think that it's a danger to the neighborhood, basically, to try to put boat storage in there. I think that it's too tight, and she's going to end up with a bunch of damaged boats and claims against her and lawsuits, and maybe her house gets burned down too or something. As far as the vacation rental, I'm a landlord, and I just, you know, people don't vacation in a basement. The only people who are going to be out there in the basement are going to be a bunch of kids looking to get out of town, get away from the cops so they can party. They're going to be underage drinking and probably drugs and all that. And my concern is when the cops show up out there and you got kids, you know, tearing the place apart, causing thousands of dollars in damage, they might say, you know, you're in on the underage drinking and arrest you too. So anyway, those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi there, my name is Brian Wingard. This is my wife Dana. We live just outside of the 1,000 feet notice, so we're kind of new to this. This was brought to our attention about a week ago. We've lived at our residence, so if you looked at it's in the south gate. It's down in the horseshoe, down in the woods over there. First, I think Connie's a fantastic neighbor. She keeps a wonderful property. It's all, you know, this isn't personal, it's nothing like that. But I would say just pulling your vehicle out of Southgate to get onto 458 in your own vehicle is, after 14 years, I can tell you there's been at least 3 or 4 times where I'm like, oh geez, and that's without pulling a trailer. So there are legitimate safety concerns about either pulling the boat out, or slowing down to make the curve in. If approved, there's 0 chance the proposed 20 feet is a legitimate fix, that you're gonna have to do something about that. Because that means the boat, which we own a boat and a trailer, is gonna have to slow down to at least 5 miles an hour, and it's just not safe. And then the only other thing I have is clarification on if the permit is granted on the boat storage. I'm fine with the bed and breakfast, the vacation thing. Does that permit stay with the property or the owner? Because there is a precedence here, and you're going to open the floodgates, and you know, I don't understand how all of a sudden everybody wouldn't just start zoning for storage over there. So do you have clarification on if the permit stays with the owner or the property?
Staff?
It does run with the land, so as long as an owner is complying with the conditions of the conditional use permit, it's a valid conditional use permit.
Right, so again, just for the record, I think Connie's wonderful, and if approved, I understand she'll do everything in her power to make this right, but whoever buys her house, or if something tragic happens, you know, I don't want that in my neighborhood, so, thank you.
And I think the main thing here is 458 Road is becoming ever increasingly dangerous with the open of K10. So many more people are using that as a cut-through road. We, with our 2 sons, were in a major accident, same kind of deal. You don't have time to stop. Where her property is located is up on a slight hill slant, And so if you have a boat that is stopping there and turning to make that turn, if they're inexperienced driving the boat in there, it will be very dangerous. On top of that, I don't know, and anybody that's in this area as well, 458 Road has a ton of bikers. There's a bike lane there. There are so many bikers early morning, late in the evening, sometimes unsafe, but you add that to the mix and there will be a significant accident that will occur. The other thing that I did need clarification on, I believe that this is an uncovered storage, is that correct?
It's a request.
I went ahead and called around to Clinton Marina. They have plenty of boat open storage spaces in dry dock. I spoke to the marina owner. We currently store our boat there. I also called Clinton Storage, Frank Mead, that owns it out of Topeka and owns several different ones. He has plenty at Clinton as well. Not covered, but uncovered storage. So there is not a significant demand that all of a sudden there is not a zone commercial section to put these boats in, that now we're going to move it into a residential area. Strongly opposed to this. So just, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before the next speaker comes up, I think we have something to interject around the driveway width.
Yeah, it'd be
Just to
helpful.
just to clarify something.
So I apologize, I think maybe my presentation was a little bit misleading. When I referenced the 20-foot driveway, that is on the driveway on the property. That is what takes them from the apron back to where the storage would be. So the actual driveway entrance was improved and widened when they made improvements to County Route 458. I believe it's 24 feet now. Keith Browning has reviewed it. He initially indicated that it was going to be a requirement to widen the drive, but then visited the site and determined that his recommendation was not, that the drive entrance did not need to be widened. So the drive entrance is currently wider than 20 feet. When I'm discussing the 20-foot gravel drive, I'm talking about the driveway on the property that would lead them from the roadway entrance back to the site.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm wife of previous speaker, and we live right next to that property that is in question. I agree with every speaker, with every argument that was voiced out already, but I believe my husband forgot to mention that also this area, if you look at it, it's Clinton Park, it's wildlife preservation. All these trees, there is creek behind it. I strongly oppose to the boat storage because, first of all, it will disrupt the wildlife in there. There are eagles living in those trees, eagles and deer. There is beautiful wildlife and wetlands in there. All the oils leaking from the boats, all this gasoline, everything, it will totally disrupt this beauty of the place. Besides, there is a creek in there. All this will contaminate the waters. And this water in the creek runs to the rivers and lakes and everything. And the other thing is that we live in residential area. If this becomes commercial, that will not be as peaceful as we really enjoy the life there right now. So that was my argument.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, good evening. My name's Carrie Loxman, my husband Austin Loxman, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and speak as shareholders, stakeholders in this situation. My husband and I just purchased a beautiful lot, less than a quarter mile from this site, and we're currently building our dream home. As longtime Lawrence residents, it's been our dream really to live in the country, to live a quiet country lifestyle. And in doing so, we've invested heavily in this area. The proposal to turn this quiet residential district into mixed use opens up serious concerns for us, just as our neighbors have also mentioned. We support small business ownership and hope that we get a chance to meet Connie and have a neighborly relationship, but do appreciate the opportunity to speak on our concerns. That we are concerned that converting this lovely residential area could impact us negatively, the wildlife, the bikers, the safety, the homeowners, for so many reasons, like you've heard tonight. Residents out here, like our neighbors have said, choose to make our lives outside of the eyesores of the city, the noise, the commercial waste, the traffic, scrap metal seekers, all those things that come with projects such as this. And I just ask that you please consider what a boat storage might look like and sound like across the street from your country home. And really keep your residents in mind when considering these permits to protect the pastoral beauty of our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Hello, my name is Laddie, James Laddie. My wife and I live immediately west of Connie Robertson's property. It's the old schoolhouse that was built there in 1893. We're doing some work to it, and we plan on retiring in that little schoolhouse. I have no reason to object to any of this plan that Connie Robertson might have with her property. Her property is probably one of the nicest looking properties in that whole area right there, including those homes that are bigger and newer on the south side. And I'm certain that she has plans to be able to keep this storage for the boats and RVs out of sight behind her home, which you can't see. We live there, we're in and out all the time, and as far as having expertise with traffic control and safety with driveways and all that stuff, I really have no expertise there, but I do know that whenever you're driving on any of the roads around the county or in the city, you have to use common sense to avoid any kind of danger. I don't see this creating a danger. That's a plenty wide driveway. It's the same size as ours. And I wouldn't have any trouble pulling a boat or a trailer in my driveway, and I doubt if anybody that does that on a regular basis would have any trouble either. I'm in support of anybody that wants to improve their property any way they can. If it's going to develop into an eyesore or something like that, Connie's not the person that's going to make that happen. You can drive by her property and look at it and see the condition of it and realize that she cares about what her property looks like. And I think she also cares about creating any kind of a public danger because of boat storage or whatever the case may be. I think that in this situation, we could probably be alarmist about a lot of different things and assume that anything that might be an improvement could be a negative as well, and it's possible, it could be, but I certainly have no objection to that plan that she has with the boat storage or the Airbnb plan. I think it'll be perfectly fine. I certainly don't see it devaluing my property at all, and I wish my property looked as good as hers. We're trying to get there, but it's going to take us a while if we ever do. But I certainly don't have any objection to this plan that she's after, and I'd be in support of it. And we live immediately next door. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is James Bartle. I reside at 701 Fox Chase Court, but more specifically, I'm the general manager of a limited liability company, Westwick LC, and we own property in this immediate area. And in fact, we have property that is to the east, to the north, and to the west of Connie's property. We filed written comments. I hope you have those in your materials. We have no objection to either of the two proposed permits. Connie is a very responsible, very trustworthy person. If you look at her property today compared to the way it was when she got on the property approximately 15 years ago, huge improvement, no comparison. We do think this area, the staff mentioned that there are multiple uses in this area. You know, there's owner-occupied residential, there's tenant-occupied residential, there's agricultural, there's recreational, there's home-based businesses. So this is a mixed-use area already. you know, if there's any problems, she's the type of person we could sit down and talk with and iron them out. Of course, this would be subject to a CUP, and it's been explained that any problems can be taken up with staff and enforcement measures can be taken. If this project affects anyone, it would affect us because we're her immediate neighbors, and once again, we have no objection.
Thank you, Mr. Bartle. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Amy Barnes. I live at 1063 North 1172 Road. We're on the road that runs parallel to 458 at the back of the Southgate subdivision. I just have a couple of concerns. One is there is a waterway that runs along the north side of the property, and I'm just wondering about the flood plain area and the difficulty of getting RVs, boats, that sort of thing in and out of a flooded or flood-prone area. And the other question I have is if there would be signage on the highway for the boat storage. And my main concern is the precedent this will set in a very quiet area. We've lived in our house since 1992. We were one of the first houses in Southgate. Raised our kids here, and it's incredibly quiet. It's a very safe area. And I'm not saying that the boat storage area would affect that immediately, but as more of that type of facility comes out to the area, it could affect the character of the area. So those are my main concerns, but do you plan to have signs? No signage. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Last chance. All right, bring it back up to the commission. First, I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's not an easy thing to do, to come to a public meeting and stand at that podium and speak for the first time. Most of us up here have done it at some point, so know what it's like down there. So thank you again for letting us know all your comments and concerns. So who would like to start with questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, just process order, it's typical to give the applicant a chance to.
That's correct. We usually. That was probably going to be the first question.
Oh, gosh, I had some notes here, but some of them have been touched on by various people, so I don't have to do all of them. I would like to point out, I certainly understand everybody's concerned that this is going to turn into something negative. One thing that I would like to point out, though, is that I do know when this Southgate subdivision was a subdivision in the beginning, they had covenants. The homeowners association has gone by the wayside because I don't know why, but they allowed themselves to eliminate their own covenants to keep the neighborhood nice and pretty and have all these regulations. So I guess with that, I don't quite understand now why we're trying to make me have regulations. So anyway, on to other things. I also want people to understand, and I hope they do tonight, that we're not trying to rezone anything to commercial. That is not going to happen. You've pointed that out. It's not going to become a commercial area. Again, I did speak to someone who has experience in the planning office for both the city and the county. I spoke with them yesterday, and she indicated to me that there is no evidence whatsoever that a property value goes down with the issuance or approval of a CUP. So I just want everybody to know that as well. In addition to that, and I don't know if the neighborhood knows that, but there are 4 conditional use permits right now within 1 mile of my house. In addition to that, there are currently 5 home-based businesses, and one of those is in the subdivision. So, and addressing crime, I can't tell you what's going to happen. All I can do is tell you, I don't have crime out there now. I've talked to many of the neighbors in the subdivision. Crime has not been an issue, and I don't see how parking boats or having people stay in my home would bring in any kind of crime. If it does, I think it would definitely have to be addressed at that time, but I don't foresee it. In addition to that, I certainly can't tell you what Mother Nature's going to do and if lightning's going to strike and we're going to have a fire out there in the timber. That's beyond everyone's control. However, some of the trees that are behind my house are going to be cleared out. So that's going to open the area where the boats themselves, they're not going to be trees hanging over boats or anything like that. I have talked to my insurance agent. There's some additional insurance required if I go ahead with this for both the boat storage and the Airbnb, 2 separate policies. So I have looked into that. I've heard some comments here tonight about wildlife, and and I have to laugh. I'll tell you, if you guys wanted some of that wildlife that's in my backyard, you can all have it. But the trees are coming down whether any of this happens. That's what started the whole thing. I have huge dead elms. I have the long thorny locust. Every time we have a storm of any kind, I'm out there with a chainsaw cleaning them up. So I've decided I'm bringing in a dozer and the trees are going. And I thought, well, if the trees are going, I might as well use this for something. That's how it all started. So I'm sorry if anybody's upset that the trees are going, but they're going. That's just a fact of life, I guess. I would also like to point out that behind my house in the past 15 years that I've lived there, I have had tractors, trailers, box blades, carry-all, a brush hog, various lawnmowers, all parked behind my house, and I guarantee you probably no one knew that they were there. That's how well screened that area is. People have talked about underage drinking and that sort of thing. The Airbnb will not be like that. What I'm trying to target with that is somebody coming into town for a football or basketball game, KU graduation, needing a place to stay for a night. There will be no alcohol allowed on the premises, no weapons, no smoking, and no pets. That's just my rules. Again, I would like to have like a 10 o'clock curfew on anybody that was doing the Airbnb. There will be no parties. I mean, that's just not what I'm looking at with this at all. Let me see. And Becky did touch on the fact that there wouldn't be any tents or anything in the yard, so that will not be happening. Some of the issue with traffic, I have talked to a couple of people at the county, and they've indicated that, in fact, I was laughed at when I told them where I was and worried about increased traffic, because they said 458 can handle lots of cars and traffic. And I understand the issue of maybe a boat pulling in or pulling out, but, you know, you just got to be careful when you're driving, no matter where you are. I will also say, as far as the Airbnb is concerned, for approximately 12 years that I lived there, I had from the 1st of April to this time of year, for 12 years, my family, 7 family members, staying in my basement. 2 cars there every time they came down. Again, I really doubt anyone in Southgate subdivision knows that that happened. I had nieces who played serious softball in Kansas City. They were at my house on Wednesday or Thursday night, stayed till Sunday, came in at midnight after the games in Kansas City. So what has happened there for so many years is probably not going to be as much traffic as what I had when my sister and her family stayed with me all those times. And another issue with that, and I have checked with the county, I can get roommates. I can have 3 cars, 4 cars there with roommates, and I don't need a permit for that. So I think we need to see the big picture, and in my opinion, the big picture is I'm trying to park some boats behind my house, let some people sleep in my basement if they need a place to sleep, and that's pretty much the size of it. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Don't go anywhere. Any questions from Ms. Robertson before she sits down?
I have a
Commissioner Sains.
Ma'am, how long did you say you lived there?
I moved in 2005. My house was completed then, and I moved in 2005.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have one?
No, I had none.
Oh, okay. All right, so now we're back up to the commission. Any questions or comments? Commissioner Ashworth.
I just had a question for staff, if they could address this issue of precedent. the concern that was brought up about precedent starting a commercial operation?
Well, anything's possible, right? Zoning and development is pretty fluid, and we don't keep out applications. What any application has to do, though, is go through a thoughtful process to determine if it's feasible in any area. And so anything's possible, but it doesn't set a legal precedent, in other words. So would it be a factor? Would it be part of the context around a future application? Yes, but it doesn't guarantee any kind of commercial creep, in other words.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Follow-up question on that, Scott. Are services like car services or boat service, like a sort of service shop, allowed either by right in the zoning or with a CUP around this area?
Yeah, if Becky could address, well, I might have to look it up. It's a good point that certain uses are conditional uses, and conditional uses are kind of at a level where they're kind of presumed to be approvable with conditions because they fit in with the zoning district that they're listed in, whereas other uses that get more intense in nature have to go to a different higher zoning district, commercial zoning district.
Okay.
But maybe give us a minute and we'll get
Sure.
back to you on that one.
And while you're at it, if this is zoned agricultural, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah, so what kinds of uses could occur in an agricultural district that might be more intense than this?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I can't hardly hear the question, but you asked about the zoning now?
No, we're just asking about if they're looking up some items to answer Commissioner Sinclair's question, and I'm asking that because this is an agricultural zoned area, what type of agricultural uses could possibly come into this area without having to come through a process?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Becky has it.
Becky?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start with your question first as far as what would be permitted in the agricultural district. So it does permit the kind of standard, what you think of as agricultural uses, but then it would also permit things like animal hospitals for large or small animals, commercial dog kennel, commercial riding stable, churches, college and schools, country club. So it does permit by right some less maybe traditional, what you think of as traditional use for an agriculturally zoned property.
I would add, within traditional ag, it could be truck storage, grain truck storage, combine storage,
Correct.
tractor storage. So some of those uses kind of go without saying that they would also be permitted without any process.
Correct. And then as far as the commercial, or the uses that are listed as being conditional use permit uses, there is an opportunity, I think closest to what you had asked. There's a truck storage facility is considered a conditional use permit. Farm implement repair services, but it doesn't specifically list a mechanic shop, a car repair shop, as a use that would be permitted in any district with a conditional use permit. That would probably be something that would be permitted in a higher zoning district.
Any follow? Commissioner Sam?
A quick question for staff. Connie mentioned that there were 4 other CUPs in the area. Do we know what those CUPs were approved for, or how far they are from the property?
Not off the top of my head, with the exception of the Westwick rugby facility that took approval of a conditional use permit.
I think Mr. Crick has that research completed.
Of course he does.
You know, Google completes its searches in 0.0000000 seconds, and Jeff, I think, just beat Google.
I tried. The 4 conditional use permits that were referenced are all east of the property here. One is the Westwick Rugby Complex. 2 are for Lawrence Landscape, which is more up towards K10. 1 is for topsoil removal, and it's also for the business operation. And Rural Water District number 5 has a CUP for a booster/pump station that is also located due east on 458.
but those are several miles away.
Westwick would be the closest one.
Westwick's close, but
And Rural Water 5's booster pump is pretty close by, but the topsoil and Lawrence Landscape is more towards K-10, kind of to
Okay.
the northeast.
thank you.
Could whoever has control of the layers put up the floodplain?
This is a
Representation of the floodplain in the larger area. This is the subject property. The stream corridors here, the floodway. And then here is a kind of zoomed in view of the subject property with the floodplain located on the very edge of their property. So not within the area where they are proposing to put the boat storage.
This is the most recent FEMA map?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments, questions? Commissioner Sands.
Thought maybe, since one of the neighbors mentioned a concern about fire truck access, does anyone have any
Well, that's kind of a
expertise or
question.
concerns?
Is this city service or is it a volunteer fire?
That's a great
Township
question.
out there.
I can answer that. Yeah. It's it's Wakarusa is the responding agency for that area, and they are mostly volunteer. They have 3 paid staff, so there's always one person on site. It's a manned station at this time, and it's reasonably close.
Well, can we draw on your expertise as a member of the volunteer fire department on how your department or any department would address a fire back in that area?
So the only part that would give me any concern, and it's actually quite a ways back from what's being proposed, would be those cedar trees. That's that dark color there. Fire that gets into cedar trees gets tricky, but it's not a real contiguous area of cedar trees. This kind of scrub growth that you're talking about with the honey locust and elm trees, even when they're dead, they don't catch very quickly. And they don't tend to spread, especially except into the undergrowth. I'm kind of looking at Jim too for a little, or Commissioner Weaver for some indications also. But I haven't been on a boat fire yet. I've been on a couple of RV fires, and they do get hot, but they, because Wakarusa can get there pretty quickly, and we would probably also respond, Willow Springs would also respond. I don't see that spreading beyond what that might immediate residents or other RVs there. I think it's something that we would get there and be able to contain within reason. Anything that gets out in the trees, we might have to get out and walk, but that's that's part of our protocols also. And especially with the immediate neighbor not being especially concerned, it doesn't give me a lot of pause. There are a lot of residences and a lot of agricultural storage that is much tighter and much trickier, and we deal with that when we need to.
What about the 24-foot access right off of 458?
We can get in anywhere. We might not be able to get out.
I measured that from point to point of my apron, and it's right at 30 feet from what they did 2-3 years ago when they put the shoulder on.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, Commissioner Woolen?
I would ask that about traffic. I know our traffic engineer looks at these and we take his advice and appreciate his advice. At what point, because a lot of this is the urban growth area and slated for a little bit more development, possibly residential development, at what point does that start to become an issue with 458? I know they improved it significantly not long ago.
Well, I would just say, relatively speaking, you're used to seeing traffic studies for bigger projects that generate, can generate hundreds of trips a day. And when the county engineer reviews an application like this and sees the very low level of really residential traffic, it doesn't give him, I don't mean to speak for Mr. Browning, but it doesn't give him concern, this particular one, to want to even study it much more than knowing that there's the occasional drop-off or pickup of a trailer or a boat, very rarely. And you can count on, the trip manuals say that any one house generates about 10 trips per day. You think about your own house and who's all coming to your house and you going and coming and family. It's about 10 trips per day anyway. And so, you have a context where you see multiple driveways on the road. It is rural living, so you can expect to have, some rural type of trailers and things going into driveways and such. And so I do think that the the hill presents the greatest concern in a situation like this. And if Mr. Browning has reviewed it for that and has found it to be safe, then that would be the recommendation coming from his office.
I know he's not present tonight. Is he likely to be at the county commission when this item goes forward?
I believe so. I actually spoke with him today. He indicated that he would be there, but I obviously don't know.
Just to give another chance for the public to also hear back from him specifically.
And I think at that meeting, he would definitely be providing his feedback, be available to answer questions.
And we will relay this discussion to him as well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Struckhoff.
I appreciate the comments regarding safety, especially for cyclists out there. I've ridden over 100,000 miles in Douglas County alone on my bicycle over the years, in the 22 years I've lived here. And that road is one of the most popular routes in the county. I was grateful for the county's vision in widening it for safety. You make a road safer for bikes, you make it safer for everybody else as well. The apron improvements that were there are pretty significant. And I'll note that the applicant's house on her property is actually the high point, which according to topographical maps and a drive-by indicates that that's really the highest point in that with the slight floodplain in the back that was shown just a moment right here. But where her house is actually the highest point in the area. It looks like for hundreds and hundreds of feet around, perhaps a mile around. With the exception of the hill coming up on the other side, on the south side of 458. When I went out there to drive around and look at the property, I noticed that RVs are very popular in that area. There's a lot of people who use RVs and have them parked in their driveways, especially on the south side of 458 and Southgate and surrounding roads there. I noticed that in the last 10 years, riding and driving out there frequently, there have been a lot of new Morton-type buildings and very large vehicle garages, which may contain more RVs, but it looks like RVing is very popular among the residents out there. So I have not noticed in my riding or driving in there a lot of problems with RVs or trailers or boats with the ones that already exist, and I don't anticipate a lot of additional problems with this. I'm not a boat user. I've never owned a boat that I couldn't pick up by myself, and so I don't know what the habits of boat users on trailers or boat storage patrons, whether they weekly go out and pick up their boat and take it, and then continue with it out to the lake, or whether they pick it up in the spring, take it to the lake and leave it there all year and bring it back in the fall. But in either case, I'm fairly comfortable with maybe a doubling of the number of boats that might be in the area at any one time, or RVs. I would guess there were 10 to 15 RVs visible within a mile of this location, many of them in the Southgate area. And so in general, I'm okay with the idea of having a few more out there.
Okay, if we continue along the line of just focusing on the CUP for the boat storage for a moment, since Commissioner Struckhoff has started us on that path. So, Commissioner Sinclair.
Question for staff. Is there, how many boats or RVs could Ms. Robertson store on her property now that she owned? Is there a limit on that under?
Under her ownership, I don't believe there is a limit.
Okay. And so if she was a boat fanatic and had 10 boats out there, that may not be a problem by itself.
It would be an interesting discussion, but but per code, in fact, we've had a situation where we've had multiple RVs on a property, and it turns out they were being rented, so we had a compliance issue there. So there's a reasonableness, but it's not unheard of to have trailers of four-wheelers and trailer boats and RVs, and, you know, a family that likes their toys, who lives on property that has the room for it, can load it up fairly significantly.
Okay.
In other words, there's no requirement to put it inside a structure.
Anyone else? Commissioner Williams?
I'd just like to follow up on the floodplain, just part because we've got it up here. The Southgate neighborhood, that's probably a pretty tender issue right now. The horseshoe part, as they referred to, sits right up along Washington Creek, and there's been some significant flooding in the past, but especially this year. And so I kind of have a heart for it when you're asking those questions about what does this do to the long-term floodplain, to have a little bit more covered space or lose some trees, and what's the issue for the immediate. For the immediate, I'd say it's far enough out of this floodplain that it shouldn't be an issue there. And as far as the area of tree clearing there on that hilltop, I don't think it's a large enough area to be a great concern in terms of impacting the floodplain further on. Though I do know, I believe that might be one of the areas that the county is hoping to remap. I know Washington Creek is, to remap the floodplain, and this area might be also. So we'll have a little better data, but it's far enough up out of there. I don't think that's going to be a concern for its downstream impact. Commissioner Ashworth, do you have any impact on that, insight?
I don't, it doesn't, it's too far away, I think, for there to be much of an impact.
Ms. Robertson, I have a question, if you could come up. There was a concern raised about oil or gas leakage. I mean, are you going to prepare the surface for this boat storage area?
At this point, no. It'll just be grass.
Just grass?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
And one other thing too, and I don't know how that plays into any of this, but part of my regulations would be, and we had talked about insurance and that sort of thing, anybody who would store something on there, I would have to see proof of insurance for that boat or RV, and that will be kept current. So that's just something else to throw out there. But no, I don't, hopefully nobody's going to set anything out there that's leaking. And there will be no draining the boats or whatever they do, you know how some of them do that. There's no kind of clean out or anything like that for any of these facilities. That'll all have to be done at the lake or a campground or something. That will not be done on this property.
And it's your intention to continue to reside in this residence?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to be personally approving each boat
Pretty
or
much. That's the story.
RV that goes behind
Yes.
your house?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Robertson, while you're there, sorry. You had mentioned about wanting to kind of limit the boat size and RV size. You're not looking to have monster things out there, but smaller things. Do you have you thought of a number in mind, or just kind of know it when you see it, or?
Foot-wise, you know how long it is?
Yeah.
I don't want any yachts. I don't want anything like that. I'm talking about a boat you might be able to ski behind. And I mean, there are some sitting in Southgate, that size of boat. And again, the RVs, maybe I should just call them campers. I'm talking pull trailers that you can pull behind a truck or something. I'm not talking any big buses or anything. I think it would be too, if things start getting too big back there, then they would have problems probably getting in and out. And I don't want that. I want them to be able to pull in, back a boat in, and move on down the road.
Okay.
So.
Do you have any plans to improve the driveway in the future?
Yes, I will. I have to make it wider.
The entire driveway?
Mhm.
And will it remain gravel?
Pardon me?
Can you keep it gravel, or do you have
Yes,
to?
it can be gravel, correct? Yeah.
Okay.
And it will. It'll be, well, as she showed on that map, it'll go around to the east side of that shed and back to the storage area.
All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you. So on the COP for the boat storage, any additional comments, motions? Commissioner Ashworth.
I make a motion that we approve a conditional use permit for boat storage use located on approximately 6.3 acres at 1072 North 1200 Road. What's the rest I'm supposed to do? Is that it?
Subject to
Subject to
the findings in the
findings in
staff
staff-
report
staff
and
report.
subject to the conditions listed in
Subject to
the...
the conditions listed.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Willie. Any further discussion or comments before we vote? Commissioner Sinclair.
Just quickly, I mean, I'd like to just say that I understand a lot of the public's concerns about a CUP like this being a sort of a gateway to other developments, but I think our discussion tonight has kind of elucidated the fact that people can develop their properties out there for uses that are more intense, I would think, than what this is by right. And this doesn't seem to be something that is really that intense. We're talking about 10 boats or RVs, and I think it's fitting with the area.
I'd like to
Commissioner
make a
Willing.
comment also. If this were not so excellently well screened, I think that would certainly give more weight to the visual and the neighbors that are concerned about that. But I feel like with being back in the trees and having trees on both sides, that really does help. I drive by there regularly, and it really is quite hidden back behind that house. And I think though we may see some, that there's a process if something is not going as according to plan. But I really think that because there's so much natural screening there, I think the neighborhood will become used to it. I don't think it'll be an eyesore of any sort. So.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we have a vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve? All those opposed? Passes 8-1 with Commissioner Payden in opposition. All right, now the matter of the the conditional use permit for the short-term rental. Any questions or comments on that? Any motions? Commissioner Woolen.
Mr. Chair, if you'd address the difference between in the county versus we're going to be later talking about short-term rentals in the city, can you address why we're not talking about that yet, even though we're talking about a short-term rental?
Oh.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can get that.
So there's a difference between city and county zoning codes that county requires the conditional use permit for short-term rental. It's called lodging, I think. So the language is a little bit different, but later tonight you'll see a text amendment pertaining to the city-required short-term rental program. So this is the conditional use permit out in the county, under the county zoning code.
Okay, with that explanation, any questions, comments, or motions?
Just have a quick
Commissioner
question.
Sanders.
This CUP is valid for 10 years. And the previous one was 5 years. What's the logic behind having two separate lengths of time? I understand they're two different CUPs, but
I think impactfulness, one being a
more intense.
right. I think that's
Okay.
what I was looking for.
Okay.
Any others? Any further comment? Motions? Commissioner Sinclair?
Just a quick comment. I thought the only comment I guess I really heard in opposition was sort of a generalization as to the types of people that would want to rent a basement. I just don't really see that having much evidence or support. And I based on Ms. Robertson's comments about the folks, the family members and friends she's had staying there with her over the course of the years, I don't see how having a two-bedroom short-term rental in her basement would really cause any sort of difference or impact in a negative way.
Well, I'm also comforted by the fact that this is actually an owner-occupied.
Right.
So she's going to be upstairs, so if anything starts to get out of hand, I'm pretty sure it's going to end quickly. So that gives me some comfort about what happens in there. Plus, if it uses the Airbnb platform, there's an initial application process where she can see how the applicants have been rated by prior places that they've stayed, and also she gets to communicate with them. So she's, actually choosing who stays there. It's not going to be like a hotel where anybody can come and stay. Any additional comments or questions? Any motions? Commissioner Butler.
I recommend forwarding the conditional use permit for a rooming, boarding, and lodging house use to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions listed therein.
We have a second. Seconded by Commissioner Payton. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 9-0. Thank you. What's that bring us to? Where's my chart? Okay, I lost my agenda.
You need one?
Yeah, you have a quick. That brings us to item number 4, which is consider approving a conditional use permit for Turf Masters located at 677 East 1250 Road.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Catherine Week, one of the planners in the Planning Office, and this is a conditional use permit for a slightly different use. This one will be for the truck storage facility as enumerated as a conditional use that could potentially be permitted in the county. This property is, looks like there was a typo there, located at 677 East 1250 Road. This shows you in the aerial map where in relation to the city limits we're talking about. It's south on 59 Highway, just to the east on 1250 Road. Surrounding zoning in the area, this is, as you can see, the majority of it, minus a small conditional zoning in the corner there, is all county ag. So it's mostly agricultural land with some rural residential properties. So key points of this particular CUP request is, again, the subject property is zoned agricultural A, and this particular use, which is truck storage facility, is only permitted as a conditional use permit in that zoning district. There is a similar business operating on that site currently that utilizes a truck storage facility use. It was approved under a CUP in 2006. So this new owner has purchased the property and would like to continue to utilize the property as it has been developed. And so they are seeking a new CUP to do that. The previous CUP expired after a 10-year period. It actually lapsed for 3 years. So this new owner is going through the process to try to get that reestablished so that he can continue to utilize the property for the uses which it developed under. Just to let you know that we had one letter of communication. I believe it made it into your packet. It was a letter of support. Other than that, we had no prior communications on this particular CUP. So again, the review criteria that we consider when we're looking at types of uses that are going for conditional use permits is the zoning and the uses of nearby property, which, as I said, is mostly agricultural, a few rural residential properties. Whether or not the character of the area is changing with this particular CUP, there would be no change in character, no change in zoning. It is already developed. There was no proposed changes to the structures or to the site, so this would just be continuing the existing character. The length of time the property has been vacant, this property has not been vacant. It has been occupied and operated in a similar manner to what is being proposed. And any public gain compared to hardship of the landowner, there was no real mitigating impacts. Those that could be potential impacts where there may be increased use would be potentially addressed with the staff's recommendation for conditions. Any conformance with the comprehensive plan, this area is not in the urban growth area or any identified area of urban growth, and so it's not specifically addressed as to whether or not these type of uses are addressed in the comprehensive plan. So this, again, is not changing any of the underlying character. It is not going against comprehensive plan. So the existing plot plan, as I said, there will be no changes. This is similar to what was presented some 13 years ago when they originally applied for the first CUP on this property. The structure under that first CUP approval that was built is that what it says proposed storage shed is actually where the location of the structure is now, and that would be where the truck storage is taking place on the site. So there are no changes proposed to this property. Access is already taken off of East 1250 Road. So if this CUP were approved, staff is recommending at minimum the following conditions, and these are similar conditions as to what was approved in the original CUP. These conditions allow the county to evaluate whether or not the conditional use permit is being adhered to. So there's a review period of 5 years as recommended. And then the permit again shall expire after 10 years. So if they wish to continue that, they would need to reapply for another conditional use permit. Other conditions would be to maintain this specific use, not have the uses creep. So that would be specifically to limit the use to the truck storage for the business. So they wouldn't be able to use it for repair of other equipment for other entities. It would only be light repair for those trucks that they have on their site. And so not commercial repair or servicing of other equipment. Other action that was required after the presentation here is that it would go to City Commission for approval, and then any building permits. In this case, they don't have any, so there wouldn't be that step. So if there were at the time, they would have to apply with the county for a building permit. So staff is recommending approval of this CUP at 677 East 1250 Road for the truck storage facility. So I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Is the applicant present?
How's it going, guys? My name is Dustin Nye. I'm owner of Turf Masters. She did a pretty good job of kind of outlining the way we want to use the property. First and foremost, I kind of want to clear up, we're in the process of purchasing it. We wanted to make sure that this CUP was going to be something that would go through before we finalize the purchase, obviously, so we could move our equipment over there. It's a really good opportunity for us considering we do a lot of work in Baldwin and Lawrence, and it's a nice central location. Like she said, James had previously operated Enviro Wash out of that, and we're not going to change anything, kind of like he did. Our guys are just going to get the trucks and leave and go back into town and work. There's no clients that come to the property or anything like that, so it's just simply storing our stuff, picking them up, and going into town to work. I mean, we're not trying to, if anything, we want to make the property look better. We're obviously big on keeping the outside and everything nice, and we don't want equipment out everywhere. It's going to be, you know, inside the barns and stuff like that. So we would like to keep the property looking good, and that's about it unless there's any questions.
Thank you. There may very well be some questions. This time we'll open this item for public comment. Any members of the public that wish to speak, please come up to the podium, sign in, state your name, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak?
Commissioners, thank you this evening. Jason Flory. I am just outside of the 1,000 feet, but I am here for a couple other family members. And we do operate and rent all the land right around this building. And I just want to say we would welcome them. I know Dustin and Jack that own this. James has operated his business out of there very, very, very clean and successfully for all these years, and as part of the community out there. we would just welcome it. We would support this, and I just want to get up and voice that and communicate that across. Sorry, I'm filling out all the paperwork here, but hopefully it works for you, Dustin. So anyway, thank you guys for your time, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? All right, seeing none, well, does the applicant wish to respond to that one comment? We'll bring it back up to the commission. Any questions or comments? Commissioner Willie.
So if the CUP had been, I'm sorry, I'm asking staff, I'm asking Catherine. So if the CUP had stayed current, would we even, because it runs with the land, would we even be up discussing it, or would it just be?
We would still be discussing it because it expired. And
Okay.
so that 10-year
Mhm.
span was up.
Mhm.
And so they would have had to come back to get it, a new one anyway.
And were there any complaints or issues with the?
There were not. There was only concern about the county, whether or not the future applicant or the future landowner would be operating two facilities, because they have one currently, or if they're moving to this one, and they've addressed that also. This is where they would have all of their equipment, so they would just be operating one.
All right, thank you.
So I just have one process question. The difference between an administrative review by the county and the difference between an application for renewal.
So an administrative review would be, county zoning and codes would evaluate whether or not they'd had any complaints, or if they've had any use creep. Other uses have sort of started to appear on the property. If they are not in compliance with the CUP, they could actually revoke the CUP.
And all applications for renewal come back through the planning commission?
Yes, so all applications for renewal at that 10-year, after the first CUP would be invalid, they would have to start the process over. It would come before planning commission, then back to county commission.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Motions? Commissioner Struckle.
I move we approve the conditional use permit for Turf Masters based on the findings of fact in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions therein, and forward that to the county commission with a recommendation for approval.
We have a motion, we have a second by Commissioner Willie. Any comments or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 9-0. Thank you. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that the rest of the members of the public that are here are on the next item. So this one might take a little while, so if we could take maybe a 10-minute recess before we start on the text amendment. Recess for 10 minutes. Thank you.
found this. Did you take it?
I found mine.
Oh, then I'll take it back. Thank
All right, we'll resume with item number 5, to consider a text amendment to the City of Lawrence Land Development Code and Licensing and Inspection Program to revise the short-term rental program. Jeff?
Good evening, Commission. Jeff Crick with the City County Planning Office. The item before you this evening is a slightly familiar one. It is the text amendment for the short-term rental portion of the Land Development Code. I do kind of want to recap the way that the short-term rental program works a little bit, and also in the fact that it's split between 2 chapters. Chapter 6 is the short-term rental property licensing portion of the code. That item is not being adjusted by this text amendment yet. This will be adjusted by the City Commission at a later date. The item before you this evening is for Chapter 20, which is the Land Development Code, which makes the use a permitted use in the district, sets the use regulations, parking, and also sets the terminology and definition of what a short-term rental is. And we'll kind of walk through some of those details this evening. The existing program is residency-based, which means if it's an owner-occupied unit, the short-term rental would be an accessory use to the owner's property. The non-owner occupied requires a special use permit, which I believe 3 of those have made their way to you, and we've kind of talked about them in multiple courses throughout different evenings. It does include use regulations that require the property to maintain residential appearances, have certain criteria, specifications related to the use there. It also establishes the parking standard, which is 1 space per guest room. That is the current program. What we did kind of go through is what we saw with the special use permits, and it was initiated and brought forward by the City Commission with some of the issues that were being generated through that special use permit process. The City Commission noted there was some predictability and consistency issues that they were not fond of at that moment. They also wanted to make sure that they maintained public engagement throughout the entire approval process. They wanted to look at the impacts towards affordable housing for short-term rental uses, and also to kind of look at and evaluate the potential tongue-tied there, potential concentration of short-term rentals in the community. That has been kind of going on at the City Commission level, and based upon their guidance, they initiated this text amendment that we bring before you this evening. And staff has kind of looked at it and kind of rounded through the different items in here. Kind of the quick version of the text amendment itself is that the text amendment would change the use table to make short-term rental uses permitted in all zoning districts that are where you have a residential component. It would remove the residency requirement, so it would not have the differential between an owner-occupied and a non-owner occupied unit. It would just be a short-term rental unit in the way that the code works. It would also revise the parking standard revision in there. You notice the code, there was that parking for 1 per guest room. This would also kind of have what's called a use determination, that you couldn't build a short-term rental use out of raw ground. It would have to be a detached dwelling, a duplex, a certain property in the Land Development Code. The parking would be set at the amount required by that principal use, but then it could be used as a short-term rental. So that determination is you couldn't just, as a beginning use, short-term rental would not be an option. It would have to be a detached dwelling that could be used for a short-term rental. The parking, again, would just be concentrated back on that permitted principal use, and the terminology in Article 17 has been revised to remove that residency requirement between the difference between owner-occupied and a non-owner-occupied short-term rental. One thing I did not note that I should mention is in your packet is you have a memo that we've generated based on the comments from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. They heard this text amendment, I believe it was just about a week or so ago, about that time. They looked at it and kind of in their view of it, they found that there was not enough data or information to kind of really make a sound judgment at that point in time. So you do have their memo as part of your packet this evening. Now, the licensing and inspections program will also go through an amendment process. That would go for the City Commission for their consideration. Many of those following programs would kind of expand in the way that the City Commission kind of looked at and reviewed. That would include an annual notification, an annual license, and an annual inspection process that would be part of the short-term rental licensing program. It would also create an objection process for neighbors and properties in the area. It would also strengthen the probation revocation process as part of that licensing procedure. And also we're looking at ways to limit the amount of the amount of units an owner can operate in a short-term rental provision. That would all be housed in Chapter 6. That would not be in the Land Development Code. So to kind of give you an idea of the totality of the amendments we're talking about here, it is a common license process for all short-term rental units, so it would be a by right in the zoning districts. It removes that residency requirement between non-owner occupied and an owner occupied short-term rental. And you can kind of see some of those licensing procedures that we mentioned there, but I do want to make sure we're all very clear on this one. The item that we're talking about this evening is only limited to the Land Development Code in Chapter 20 for the amendments. So the licensing and those other procedures would be heard by the City Commission at a later date. It's our expectation we would pair this text amendment with the licensing text amendment to go before the City Commission, so they'd go up as one package for their consideration. But because it is an amendment to Chapter 20, it does require your review and consideration this evening. With all that, I will mention staff recommends the approval of the amendment and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for an approval. I'd be glad to stand for any questions you have.
Thank you, Jeff. This time, we will open this matter up to public comment. If you wish to comment on this proposed text amendment to the Land Use Code, please come up to the podium, sign in, and state your name. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Who would like to go first? Nothing like peer pressure.
I'm not sure I understand the difference between the licensing text amendment and the land use text amendment. So it could be that the things I'm talking to would not be pertinent to tonight's situation. You may be not.
We'll tease that out. So
Okay,
why don't you
my
go
name
ahead.
is Sherry Ellen Becker. I live here in Lawrence. The two issues that I have, I must preface in order to be true to my values about how short-term rentals, especially non-occupied ones, affect the housing affordability in our city. When we were in front of the City Commission, many owners of non-owner-occupied Airbnbs came and they stood where I'm standing and they said, we bought it as a rental for our golden years, for our retirement, but we couldn't rent it out. And they forgot to finish the sentence. We couldn't rent it out for what we wanted. And that is, when you do this and allow the non-owner-occupied Airbnbs, you're giving them an avenue to get more money out of a place than what the rent would get. Therefore, there's a family that doesn't get a place to rent at market rate because they have a way to get above market rate. And one of the commissioners mentioned that there was a need for them because there wasn't enough hotels. I called around today and I had my daughter call around when she got home from work. This weekend is homecoming weekend unless I'm mistaken. There are rooms at the Hampton Inn, there are plenty of rooms at the Doubletree, there are rooms at the Spring Hill Suites. The Best Western Suites are sold out, and the one by the Arts Center, the Marriott by the Arts Center, is sold out. And there are rooms, according to Hotels.com, at the O'Connell Lodge and the Baymont, and I could get as far as putting my security code on the credit card number. So I really do believe that there are rooms there. And so I don't think it's a need, and it's taking away from our affordable housing. And I'm not sure how much community good comes out of this in terms of like jobs. My suspicion is most of the cleaning done here and stuff is done. I'm going to give my daughter Sue's friend Avery $60 to go clean the house, and let's hope she doesn't twist her ankle, file for unemployment, or because it's a gig economy. It doesn't serve community long-term good. Because they're getting a tax abatement to do it. They're taxed at a residential rate to operate completely, solely a business in a neighborhood. And so you give tax abatements when there's community good paying jobs to come of it or something, but there's no community good here. The owners came up and said that they enjoyed all their neighborhood support. Well, let them bring affidavits of their neighborhood support. Don't make us go out and get a protest petition. And let's talk about ADA compliance at another time, because they are subject to the ADA according to RockyMountainADA.org that talk to the Justice Department.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
Well, I forgot my torch and my pitchfork tonight, so that's a good thing, but.
Could you please state your name?
My name is Jeffrey Kincaid, and I'm not sure if really there's only been 3 applications for the special use permit that's originally required under the regime as it stands right now, but I think they paused some of the ones, so I might be one of those 3. I run an Airbnb on behalf of my grandfather that has an accessory cottage that he rents out as an Airbnb, and it's something that he really looks forward to, both as a way to make extra income and as a project and a useful thing to spend his time doing. He's 90 now, and I enjoy helping him with it. And that building is a building that would otherwise be vacant for a whole lot of time, and I don't know that it would really lend itself to being a traditional affordable housing type situation for someone. One of the questions that the previous speaker mentioned was the impact on affordable housing, and I think that that's going to be completely subject to the vagaries of the market, and with the amount of development that's going on in terms of additional units of normal rental residential housing, it's anybody's guess what rates are going to do in terms of affordable housing. The Airbnb market is a little bit different because it's not, and this is the way it's marketed from Airbnb, and also the way the different hosts market it is not just a place to stay. You're trying to make an experience that the individuals will like and come back to and get routine business. One question I did have was I was a little bit curious about how it came to be, or if it was just by fiat of the city commission that this was considered a separate special use versus special users, because I guess it's because the people are making money off of it instead of just letting someone stay at their house. But to me, that the actual use, people going into a house, sleeping in it overnight, watching TV, pulling in and out of the driveway, I'm looking for some elucidation how that use is different. I have an Airbnb that's right across the street from where I live. They don't cause any trouble for me at all. If anything, they're better neighbors than anybody who's ever been there before.
Thank you. We'll probably have questions about your comments. Anyone else want to speak?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Wong, and kind of want to touch on Airbnb in general in that I believe we as Airbnb hosts provide a special niche in that we do provide affordable housing. For example, I rent out a room, and all of our rooms are anywhere between $30 to $40 a night, and include everything from super awesome midco, fast internet, to heat, the whole nine, everything. I would say that's pretty affordable, but I know everyone's definition of affordable is obviously very subjective to each and every individual. So when I priced the rooms originally, I wanted to make sure that they were affordable and attractive to folks, but also with a maximize my revenue thought process to obviously cover all the expenses from a $3K annual commercial policy that we have on both of the Airbnbs that are in the special use permit processing cycle right now that have been put on hold due to all the additional conversation we want to have on it. Also, too, in terms of being neighborly, I'd probably say one of them actually is my childhood home, and I think I've gotten to know my neighbors a lot better than when I was a teenager and probably tearing up the neighborhood, which is opposite of what an Airbnb host we're doing today. You know, I give each and every one of them my personal cell phone number so that if I have had a couple call me about, hey, people were doing, they were parking on the street and they were blocking the neighbor across from trying to safely back out and not hit their car. I said, hey, I will call, and I have a platform that everyone has to fill out a form ahead of time. So we are very cognizant and want to make sure that when you adjust, you know, the, not the permitting process, but like the land use, that we adhere to that. I am also in very agreement of not differentiating between a non-owner occupied and a owner occupied. I believe everyone should be on that same level of scrutiny on whether or not we as an Airbnb host, we all want to play on a level field. And I believe just in general on everything with the Airbnb process. And also keep in mind that what we're doing is not just beautifying the city of Lawrence, but also Douglas County and everything, because, you know, we're all neighbors and we want our home value to not go down, but up, so that when we sell and want to move, and we can move to wherever we want and make as most money out of the home. I know that sounds a little more capitalistic, but at the same time,
Thank you,
those are my
Mr.
opinions.
Wong.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Hi, I'm Tina Santalaria, live on Ranchero Drive. I'm a short-term rental host and a landlord. And I got into short-term rentals because, well, for a lot of different reasons. Okay, I won't go into all of that. I thought this was going to talk about the special use permits, and I am glad to see that the city is looking at the initial special use permits as being a little overkill. And with my long-term rentals, I know that we do pay the city a small fee, or a licensing fee, which I think is very reasonable. And I would like to see something similar, you know, adopted to the short-term rentals as well. And I think that's the direction that we're heading in. I didn't feel like tonight was the night that we needed to sell you on the Airbnb concept. I think you've all heard all angles of that. But I do have a question on the lady that was here earlier talking about a tax abatement, and I just would like to know what that is, because I do not get a tax abatement, and if there is one available, I'd like to know. And as far as the difference between the short-term and the long-term rentals, my bookkeeper has told me many times that I do much better on my long-term rentals because there is a lot less maintenance and there's a lot less of my time on my short-term rentals. I just was jotting down some of the different maintenance people that I pay. It is not my sister, brother, child, whatever. I have a landscape company with two ladies that charge, they charge a lot of money to do beautiful work. I do pay a 73-year-old woman a good living wage to help me. She's a great helper. I use the lawn doctor for my yard work. I have several home maintenance people that we use, not to mention carpenters. I mean, it's constant upkeep. Where with a long-term rental, you kind of like sign the contract, they go in, and there's very little maintenance involved during the time they're there because they just don't tell you. I mean, sometimes they do, but it's just different. So I spend a lot of money on my short-term rentals, a lot of time, and the end result is about the same. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, my name is Steve Shanks, and my wife and I host our own home as an Airbnb when we're not there. So I was really just wanting a clarification on what's owner occupied. So we live in the home, but when we get an Airbnb, we usually just travel. And so I understand that some Airbnbs, people are living in the home with renting out a room. And so I was really just wanting a clarification on that.
No, we'll get that for you. You want to respond?
Under the current program, an owner-occupied short-term rental would have to be a majority of the year spent living in the unit to be qualified as an owner-occupied unit. If the unit is rented out while the owner is away, it does not change its occupancy status. It's the total number of days someone spends in the unit for the calendar year under the current program.
That distinction goes away with what we will be proposing in the license regulations to the city commission.
This is
And that's just-
basically a proposal that one size fits all.
It is a two-pronged proposal. This part of it, the land use component, was built on that distinction. If you recall, it was, if you were owner occupied, you went down a path of licensing. If you were non-owner occupied, you lived in your home less than half of the year, you went down the special use permit path. And that's the process that we found pretty challenging through several of the first initial projects.
Okay. Any additional members of the public that wish to speak? All right, last chance. I'll bring it back up to the commission for questions and discussion.
Could you put the slide back up of the things that we're supposed to consider and what we're not?
Any thoughts?
Most of my concerns have to do with what's coming before the city commission, I have to say, not as part of the land development code.
Yeah, I would interject that this new, and this was before the city commission, which is why we've developed it through ordinance now. This is their latest direction, and it essentially does remove the planning commission from the process altogether. Because there's no longer, if this goes through as proposed, there's no longer a requirement for a special use permit. All short-term rentals are uses by right. And if you go to the slide that has the second prong to this entire proposal, really through the licensing agreement or the license program is where we address most of the concerns that came up through the commission discussion, some on this commission and some at the city commission, which was creating, still having neighborhood objection process. Wouldn't come to the planning commission under the way we're proposing it, but, so still having some process that is afforded to neighbors, strengthening revocation processes, strengthening notice, and communicating with neighbors the contact information of any STR owner or operator, and also addressing through the limit of number of units that an individual can own, some of the affordable housing issues in terms of large corporations coming in and buying entire blocks. And, you know, this still is a really fastly evolving industry, and there have been recent articles where major hotel companies are getting in the game, and they're kind of flipping the industry on its head and trading out houses for hotel buildings. So anyway, we're trying to keep up with the changing industry, and we might be at it even, very soon. But this is where we think we need to be.
Mr. Sands?
Scott, can you illustrate that last thing you said in particular? When it Can you just illustrate how you believe this, as proposed, will prevent what you described as someone coming and buying up a...
So in the licensing program provisions itself, which is not for public consumption because it's still being drafted right now, but it certainly will be out there for the public's consumption, there will be a provision that prohibits individuals and corporations from owning more than a certain number. And right now, we're thinking about 3 as the number. And that's to keep it kind of mom and pop, because what the commission heard last time they heard this item was that small industry is what was kind of prevalent out there. And even amongst those in that industry, there was a fear of the big hotel companies coming in and changing the game for us here locally. And so.
But if I remember correctly, there was one commissioner who recommended a locality restriction, and that is not
That
included.
is not part of the proposal.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Wood?
So when this first came to us, it seemed like there was already direction from the city commission or an interest in differentiating between owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied. And because it seemed like it came with a pretty strong recommendation that way, I'm not sure that we spent a lot of time kind of questioning that framework, though it does seem like it could be a very fluid, and hard to track in terms of who really lives there and how often and how long. So I don't have a lot of trouble with that, taking away that residency requirement, but I do think it bears some discussion just because we really haven't.
That's true. Commissioner Strucco?
My sense is that our SUP process for non-owner occupied is going to be replaced by a more general umbrella policy of requiring licensing for all short-term rentals. And the neighborhood protections will stem from that policy and not from the SUP process. I'm mostly comfortable with that. I think the non-owner occupied issues that that came up early in our discussion would be generally addressed by the licensing and by the limit on number of units an individual could own. I wonder if I know some cities that are big tourist destinations. I think of New Orleans have pulled back from their short-term rental programs a little bit, having had some experience with that very problem of large tracts of large blocks being bought up by people, and people who live there no longer being able to afford to stay there. And so I'm wondering, my main question is, I thought of this in terms of our long-term rental licensing program that we already have in place. Do we expect a great deal of compliance with this? I'm thinking of the number of Airbnbs that are in any city, including ours right now. And I've also been talking with Leavenworth County recently over a property there and asking about Airbnb policies there. They have 75 Airbnbs in the county. They have 2 permits that have been pulled for them. So I'm wondering what the expectation is as far as people getting on board and Airbnb operators and hosts getting on board with that. Has that been discussed?
It's a good question. We are very confident that we are accurately tracking the Airbnbs. Our code enforcement division has methods that we're really comfortable with the numbers that we have, and we think there's between 120, 140, 60 any given time. They do go in and out, and we think we know where they all are in order to get them all in compliance within a very reasonable time frame.
I ask because we don't have much room in our house, so when we have guests, if we have more than 2 or 3 guests, we need to find a place. And I do encourage them to seek out Airbnbs. I seek them out myself when I travel. I prefer that experience, and I do like to, I do like to meet owners who are using this as a way to, especially in a place like New Orleans, as I mentioned earlier, that might be how they manage to stay in their house, in some cases.
And I would say we have that same issue with long-term rental license. Anytime you have a licensing program, you're going to do a little bit of tracking down those who aren't licensed.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Ashford.
So, in the decision that is relevant for us, the Land Development Code, it's by right in all zoning districts. But previously, through the special use permit, that's when neighbors, the public, could come and protest or support. So what will be the process without the special use permit, where that would be?
It'll be a little bit different in that it happens through the licensing process, and it will be an objection to the license being issued versus, so the proposal that we think, or that is going to the city commission based on what we heard from them, is to really kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the license holder, to the one seeking the license for the short-term rental. And then a license application would come in, notice would go out to those within a certain distance, and within that notice, you would get notified that you have a right to object to this. That would then not go to the planning commission. We're still talking about exactly which board that would go to, whether it be the BZA or Building Code Board of Appeals or somebody, a board like that, and then they would determine whether that license should be granted. We're hoping that it gives a short-term rental property a year of licensing to prove that they're a good neighbor. And then if a neighbor builds evidence that it should not be, that it should be revoked or probation, they could always bring that to us anytime through the year. And as each year's license comes up for renewal, there's that same right to object to the license being issued.
Mr. Stroko.
Just one brief question. What's the difference in application fee between a rental license and SUP?
Yeah, and before I answer that, if I may, it's what I just described, we have analogous to other kinds of licenses, like liquor licenses, where, I believe the outdoor dining has that same sort of objection, appeal process related to it. The license is going to be about $17 for the license and $50 for the inspection, for the annual inspection. The special use permit is around $750, $725. Another big gap there.
Commissioner Willie?
About affordable housing and the discussion that AHAB had about this issue, and they said they don't have enough data to say, is there, with this licensing, are we likely to, capture that data so that we can kind of moving forward know what kind of effect this is having? Because the affordable housing is a pretty significant issue for our community.
Yeah, I think so. That's going to be one of the real benefits of tracking and licensing the businesses, is that, and they are businesses in my mind, is that we'll have that data, we'll have properties associated with it to do some analysis of before and after data, what's the impact to any one neighborhood or block. So we just don't have it because we haven't really even begun the program yet. So I know there's kind of a desire for data around this, and the best we can give you is what we know today, which is what Airbnb and other platforms are showing, what we've licensed today, and the multiple sides of the story about whether this is good or bad for affordable housing, because there's two sides, if not more, to that story. Sometimes it helps you stay affordable in a house. Sometimes it's kind of a market real profit driver.
Commissioner Sands?
The yearly renewal, does that come with the same notification standards?
As proposed, yes.
Okay. So after a year, a group of neighbors could come up and say, we've lived with this for a year and we don't like it. And whomever, us, BZA, whomever, they get their
They would be
opportunity.
heard through that process.
Okay.
It's not an automatic veto, but they would
Right.
have their day in front of that board through that process.
I certainly think that that's an improvement over doing just a straight-up SUP. I don't love everything about this so far. Still open to listening to more conversation, though.
Commissioner Ashford.
I don't think I remember this correctly, but there was a concern last time about taxes if these are businesses in a residential. Does this change that?
So we talked with the county appraiser's office, and they were given guidance by the state of Kansas on how to review and look at these properties. And I think the time that we had that discussion, that was still pending to come down from the state. They have issued that guidance. Effectively, if the property has 5 or more bedrooms available for overnight guests, they are recommending it be classified as a commercial use. Anything below that would be maintained and keep as a residential use. So that is the guidance from the state to the county appraiser's offices.
That's
Following,
regardless of whatever process we come up with, a completely separate analysis.
so any of these that come in that are 5 bedrooms or more per that recommendation, that's going to require a zoning change or a special use
Just
permit?
speaking about how the appraiser values and categorizes the use.
Okay, but the appraiser is categorizing it as a commercial use while it continues to be a residential use?
Well, it's a commercial use in a residential zone
All right.
area, which is a possibility.
I know we're straying into mostly licensing questions, but this is mostly what's not going to be before this
Yeah.
board anymore. So I think that's why there's so much, so many questions about it. And suppose, I just have one hypothetical. Suppose the data comes back and they're showing a concentration in one area that's having impact, or it's having an impact on affordable housing. What's the remedy that the city would have? Can you just refuse to issue licenses to a place that's had it for X number of years?
Well, it would take a code review and possible code change, and then, you know, it's still a very active industry, so you'd have ones go in and out, and so it's not unlike anything that we go in and change. Say congregate living, Oriad neighborhood was feeling some pressure around congregate living, and we made some code amendments around that and effectively limited the ability to do congregate living in that neighborhood. So it'd be the same kind of thing. And as those uses, you know, kind of sunset out of the use, then they'd fall under the new code at the time.
Commissioner Woolley?
To follow up to that, so it would be a text amendment to, if there's a problem with, that's identified with either affordable housing or concentrating in an area affecting a neighborhood, be a text amendment to change that, but it will no longer come back to this body. Would we still have a right to initiate a text amendment on that, or would that strictly be city commission?
It would depend on if it's something that's going to be a zoning solution or a licensing solution. So, just depends.
Mr. Chair, we have a question from the.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
is it permissible?
Well, you know, we're having a pretty wide open discussion
Okay.
here. Go ahead and ask one question.
Are these licenses going to be?
Can you come up to the microphone so
Sure.
the 7 people?
Would the licenses be subject to the occupancy restrictions currently as zoned? Like if you're in a PUD, no more than 3 unrelated people, and even if there are 4 or 5 bedrooms?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think they can change that without changing that section of the code, so, yeah.
That remains in the.
So if that were violated, that would be a violation of the license.
The way we're proposing it is an unlawful act of the license. That would be grounds to take action on the license.
Right. Any additional questions, comments? No, we have one from Mr. Wong.
This is more of a question for you two gentlemen here, is that, as I understand it, when a person books, they take the sales tax and occupancy tax from that guest, and it's remitted to KDOR, and then, in theory, if KDOR remits it down to you all here, is that how?
So, Mr. Chairman, unless Jeff has a different understanding, as far as I know, the state has entered into agreement only with Airbnb for that process. So we do get some tax, any sales tax and I believe transient guest tax from anyone who uses the Airbnb platform.
But none of the others are in that agreement with the
As far
state.
as I know, there are no others in that agreement.
Right. To the best of my knowledge, Airbnb is the only one that is in on that agreement.
So these taxing issues are something that's going to have to be further discussed by the city commission and the appraiser's office. That's way beyond where we are.
Well, I was just curious, you know, I know a lot of people mention like taxes, like maybe Airbnb is kind of shortcoming, shorting the city on taxes and money. And I just want to make sure that, as far as I know, that's what Airbnb tells me, but I also want to check double, just like Reagan, trust but verify. So, all right, thank you.
All right, thanks. Well, since we're doing it, any other questions from the audience before we go on and try to figure out what we're doing up here? All right, Commissioner Sands.
So I really want to make sure that whatever we forward on to the city commission or whatever we land on as a policy for the city has a robust clawback that allows neighborhood input to really tell whomever, whatever board it's going to go ahead to, that this property as it's being used is harming the neighborhood. I don't think it's strong enough yet, and I still don't know that I fully support this as proposed.
Well, let me ask, do you support the top three? I mean, I have issues with what's under the licensing program too,
Yeah.
but that's not what we get to do tonight.
Right. I would say that I'm glad we're looking to amend it. Annual notice is great. What board it goes to, maybe that's probably not a discussion for here. Strengthen the placing a limit. I think one thing that's what's missing here is of the 4 issues that the city commission wanted to address, I don't think, as proposed, this is addressing the impact to affordable housing. I don't think it's strong enough yet to really do that. I go back to the fact saying that one of the city commissioners mentioned that there ought to be a residency requirement for it to be non-owner occupied, that it ought to stay within the city confines of Lawrence or Tier 1 or the UGA or wherever else. Maybe even spread it out to Douglas County. I don't know. You can set a number on it, and that might have a similar effect, but to a large extent, we're talking about this at length because one couple out of town who didn't live in Lawrence, who wasn't keeping the proceeds in the community, bought a property and wanted to turn it into a STR. And that's kind of why we're here, continuing to have these conversations. And I want to mention something else that in the other hearings that we've had on this, the neighbors that own and run STRs within Lawrence clearly are not the problem. You're the ones who are doing this with the true spirit of building community and really what I think the intent of Airbnb is for.
Well,
Soapbox complete.
All right. A lot of this the city commission is going to have to sort out.
Yeah.
But the 3 that we have up here that are really for us to consider, I mean, where is everyone on just having one common license process, and we don't distinguish between owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied? Yeah, wavering.
Commissioner Starkov?
I feel that the protections given by the limitation on the numbers of units that individuals can own and the broadening of the licensing program, similar to our long-term rental, gives us that control that we as planning commissioners so much crave and are going to lose, but somebody's still going to have it. And so I am comfortable with that overall. I like the fact that if you have an Airbnb, you can start it up for $67 instead of $750. That's good. But to me, the non-owner occupied possibilities were the ones that were troubling me, and based on my reading of other cities, as I mentioned, who had pulled back from that, I had the same concern for that going forward. And I haven't, these are all things that we feared as residents, as neighbors in Lawrence, things that have not, to my knowledge, happened on a large scale yet. And I think that the restrictions in the second part, the licensing program amendments, give me comfort in the first part, is that if we have this common licensing process for all short-term rentals, excuse me, treating them as we do long-term rentals, because we have a lot of non-owner occupied long-term rentals. Those are businesses in residential areas. And I think it does make sense to treat short-term rentals in the same way. But we do need some of those protections that are given in the second part, in the licensing. So in that, I find balance in that, and that's what we are charged with here. Is we are charged with accommodating business and growth and development while affording protections to the neighbors and established businesses and other stakeholders in our community. And so I strive to find that balance. This gives me some of that, I think. And the residence requirement, that to me, that falls under the same non-owner occupied, whether they live in Lawrence, whether they live in Douglas County. We have a lot of long-term rentals that are owned by people who live thousands of miles away. To me, to address Commissioner Sand's concerns about affordable housing, this does not directly address that, but the limitation on the number that can be owned by a particular operator does, in some small way. And we do need to take small steps in that regard toward protecting our stock of affordable housing, and they will all be small steps. There are no big sweeping declarations or laws or ordinances or anything we can pass to make housing affordable. We can take many small steps. And in the face of this rapidly changing industry of short-term rentals, this is one that we can take in that regard. And I think, for me, that helps me find the balance with these two congruent amendments that allow me to generally support this.
I would echo what Commissioner Starkov said, and I would like if other members of the commission can explain to us what their opposition is or what your thinking is of, because frankly, Commissioner Sands, I don't quite understand when we don't have a lot of data on affordable housing, what kind of impact that you see this having and how that would deter you from supporting it.
Okay. Well, the example that we saw from the couple out of town, they bought a property that was distressed some way financially, got it for pennies on the dollar, and then converted it over to an affordable converted it over to a STR, or wanted to. Whereas had that gone to the market as a long-term rental or maybe as a first-time home, that would have addressed an affordable housing need for at least one family.
Oh, I disagree with that analysis, because we're taking one home and thinking that, and I remember that couple, I think they were from Chicago, and I just don't see how them rehabbing or fixing up a house, however much money they put into it, would translate, how we jump in our minds that would translate to something that would be affordable. and we've talked about affordable and income ratio to, to what rent costs and utilities and all that stuff, and I just don't, one house does not
You're right.
sway me.
You're
But-
right.
But I just don't, that jump to that house would all of a sudden be affordable. I don't get to.
Well, we don't know, but you're right, one house wouldn't have fixed affordable housing in Lawrence, but without a policy prescription that ensures that housing stock in that range is available, then we're never gonna have available homes for anybody in the affordable range, or rather the risk of, because we've heard it from people who operate these, that we've heard actually one operator said that her long-term rentals make more money than her short-term rentals because of maintenance. I will tell you, that's the first time I've heard that. Everything else I've heard has said that the short-term rentals make more money than the long-term rentals.
I haven't heard that same thing. I don't know if there's any data to support. Sorry, sir, I'm sorry. We can't have this back and forth with the public. I appreciate you coming and your opinions, but I don't think we've seen any data that supports a statement of.
No, I agree, not in this city.
Okay.
One of the times that we've spoken about this, I talked about, I had 4 studies that illustrated that there is an effect on affordable housing availability in town, in cities where non-owner occupied short-term rentals have a wider use. Now, it's not a great effect, but there is an effect, and those are studies. They're not news articles. So.
Mr. Sinclair.
Again, I think one thing I like about this is one of the things that made me uncomfortable a little bit as we discussed STRs as they came before us was it felt like we were kind of expected to go outside of like our purview in terms of land use and get into policy considerations. And I feel comfortable about this because it kind of places policy considerations, sort of bigger things about affordable housing in front of the elected officials. So we can deal with the land use issue here and decide if we're okay with these all being collapsed into one category, and then the city commission can figure out how they're going to deal with it. So I'm very comfortable with it myself. I just think these sorts of discussions are beyond our expertise. We're not accountable to the electorate, and they can go to the city commission and bring the concerns up there.
Mr. Payton.
I have a couple concerns. I think I voiced them earlier, but one of the things that, came up last time was potential concentration of short-term rentals in certain neighborhoods, which I think we've kind of seen since we pulled up that short-term rental map, and it shows the concentration of non-owner occupied short-term rentals are near downtown and the university. And the concern with that was they were taking a lot of houses off the market. So from a bicycle and pedestrian standpoint or transportation standpoint, you're taking a lot of houses out of the market that, yeah, people probably are walking and biking to events, but they're not able to buy houses in a place that they might want to live so that, say, their kids or they can walk to the university or downtown or wherever they work. So I don't know how that's sort of being solved. I don't feel like it is. It seems like this would make it less likely to be.
I don't know that that's going to be solved with this. I think we have to follow over time, see where the trends are. But it's natural that in those areas of tourism and events, that's where you're going to find these.
Yep.
So
Yep.
We do know that much with what we know.
So it's just my concern that then you're taking housing stock away from people who might actually want to live in it in those locations. But the other thought I had or question I had was to place a limit on the number of short-term rentals that an individual can own. I was wondering if there's a specific example of how that's worked well or where that's worked well that you can look at, because it's how many rental units an individual can own, and it just seems, if that's the way we're structuring it, that seems like there's a lot of corrupt ways to,
Clearly, we're looking at loopholes, trying to tighten them up. It's
Yeah.
not the smoothest thing in the license program. It's a bit of a challenge. It was one of the legal issues we had to look at right away. And we think it's going to be, we think it's got legal standing. It's going to be probably less challenging than we would have had to figure out who was living in a house for half the year versus not living in the house for half the year. Frankly, that presented a lot of challenge for us. This one, though, we'll have resources to see if LLCs are playing games with switching names and stuff. I mean, there are ways that we can unearth and uncover a lot of that.
so like a company, each person from a big company can own.
Yeah, I
10.
mean, with any program, you can find some loopholes, if you study it hard enough, I think. But, we're on the other side looking for those as well and trying to button them up.
Commissioner Sains.
The residency requirement, that's residency requirement for owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied, correct?
Correct.
Yep. That's not without city.
Okay. Any issues with it being permitted by right in any particular zoning district by anybody? Commissioner Woolley?
I think one of the main things is to be able to get an accurate count and collect the data so that we can start to see what this does in our community. I think we have some ideas of how that might be interacting in terms of concentration and things like that. I think we need that data. And I think right now we have the issue that they exist and we want to bring them under a licensing program so we can understand them, and then we can know whether or not we should allow them to be expanding or not. Now, who gets to make that decision? I mean, who gets to put the brakes on if we get that data and we find that it's causing difficulties in our community? Is that strictly the city commission, or would you bring that information back to us?
Yeah, this commission can always, through your meetings and minutes, provide comment to the city commission, but if this gets adopted in some form where it's out of the development code, then that essentially is a city commission matter.
Will this come back to us again after it goes to the city, or is this the last time we're going to see it potentially?
This would be the last time you see this subject.
That in itself would be nice.
Well, don't vote yes just to get rid of it, but. I have to echo some of the comments that, I'm glad the policy is all being put on the city commission and not us. I guess I'm at the point, don't object to what's proposed under the Land Development Code amendments. I mean, we're going to create a level playing field across the city. And then I'm confident that planning staff is going to start collecting data, which will probably come back as reports periodically to the city commission. And I hope, it'd be nice if they came here too, as far as, the land use issues that come up, especially about what's happening in particular zoning districts. That's something that we should be able to comment on if we start to see trends. So like I said, most of my issues are going to be in the policy realm that are in the city commission, and that would just be our opinions tonight. I don't see the value in going into that anymore, at least by me. So I'm comfortable with what's being proposed now, and see what happens with this program. I'm curious if, does AHAB have the right? Well, AHAB can initiate text amendments. They've done it already. So if they start to see impacts.
They don't have that authority, but.
Well, it came to the city and then to AHAB. Okay. Well, they can certainly express their opinions too, to one of the boards that can initiate a text amendment if they start to see trends with the affordable housing. So we have a lot of different committees and commissions that are gonna be looking at parts of this. If we can have reports that are shared, like we get the rental licensing.
I foresee a
all the
mid-month
other
meeting
reports.
sometime mid-next year where you ask planning staff to provide you some data around this, once we will have had them all licensed and see a little bit of data by
Well,
that time.
it'd be good to just have it kind of on that cycle, like we get the other annual reports that come out, as to inventories and
Yeah,
things.
well, we will definitely include in our annual report.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, motions?
I think it's a great improvement on our SUP process that we tried. It didn't work so well. And I think it's less of a burden on the business owners as they come into compliance. And I just think we're going to have to watch it and see what we learn, but I don't have any specific difficulties with the proposed text.
Commissioner Strickland?
I echo Commissioner Willie's comments, and I'm glad we took the deliberative time to put the brakes on this process a little bit, re-examine. It's sometimes difficult when the industry is changing rapidly as it is, but I'm glad we took that time, and we're not afraid to say, hold on a second. As much as we wanted to do something, I'm glad we took the time to look at it a little more carefully. I think this product is far superior, as Commissioner Willie said.
Anyone else? Motion? Commissioner Strickland?
Move we approve the proposed amendments to Article 4, 5, 9, and 17 of the Development Code and forward that recommendation of approval to the City Commission.
A motion, do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Sinclair. Any comments, discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? It passes 8-1. Commissioner Sands in opposition. Thank you, everyone, for coming and expressing your opinion. I've said before, it's always hard to get up to that podium, so I'm glad you took the time to come out here and had the courage to come up. That brings us to miscellaneous items. Consider initiation of a text amendment to revise sections of the subdivision regulations for Lawrence and the unincorporated areas of Douglas County, Kansas, as necessary to implement revisions proposed to the zoning regulations. You got tongue-tied like Jeff did.
This one is an initiation, it's a reinitiation of a 2008 text amendment that was the first county zoning code iteration coming up. And this would also then tie in a subdivision regulation for the county, the joint subdivision for city and county, to make changes in the subdivision regulations that correspond to the zoning code update. This is just a request to initiate the amendment. We will be bringing this one forward to you early in the next year, would be the hope.
Any questions or comments? Or public input? Anyone wish to comment on us initiating this text amendment? No. Bring it back to the commission. Any questions or comments? Any motions? So no, Commissioner Wood.
I don't know if I can get through all this without getting tongue-tied, too. That's right. I move that we initiate a text amendment to revise sections of the subdivision regulations for Lawrence and the unincorporated areas of Douglas County as necessary to implement revisions proposed to the zoning regulations in the text amendment 816-8. Also consider the reinitiation, move to reinitiate the text amendment for revisions to the zoning regulations, unincorporated territory, Douglas County, Kansas, so that both documents can be processed under one amendment.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? And you have to repeat the whole thing. I have a second for Commissioner Weaver. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 9-0. That brings us to review and approval of our 2020 Planning Commission meeting calendar.
So this would be the proposed schedule for your upcoming year. January and February would be carried over from your existing calendar that you currently have. So this would just continue on, as you can see, through February 2021 to kind of give you an idea for meeting times and items in there.
Anybody see any serious problems with it?
Yeah, it's a lot of meetings.
Have a motion to approve the calendar for the next year?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Struckoff. I have a second.
Second.
All right, seconded by Commissioner Weaver. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passes 9-0. Any miscellaneous business such as
Just a reminder,
a reminder for Saturday night?
Commissioner Willie and her family hosting us for our planning commission social.
And with that, I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Moved by Commissioner Butler, second by Commissioner Sand. All those in favor? Passes 9-0. All right, everyone stay put. Kurt has something.